This week, Nigeria reflects. The soldier, the statesman, and a symbol of a generation, former President Muhammadu Buhari, has passed. From the battlefields of the Civil War to the corridors of power, his legacy spans decades of military rule, democratic leadership, and national debate. And so, in that spirit, we join the nation in mourning as the nation lays to rest the former leader, one-time military leader of the country, and then two-time, if you like, democratic leader of Nigeria, former President Muhammadu Buhari. He died in London last Sunday at about 4:30, according to reports, and he died after this prolonged illness. Not disclosed what kind of sickness that was, but eventually he's passed, and the nation has been thrown into mourning, with President Bola Tinubu also declaring a public holiday, putting together a committee to organize a befitting state burial for, if you like, funeral for the late president. But who exactly was the man, former President Muhammadu Buhari, beyond the uniform and beyond the ballot? What dreams did he carry for Nigeria, and which did he leave unfulfilled? We talk about that, his times, and indeed his life. Join the conversation as we explore the life and times of Muhammadu Buhari beyond the headlines. Of course, the nation is speaking about that. Several diverse thoughts and reactions to the death of the former president. I'm joined today on Homo Politicus. I say welcome to you. Yes, welcome to Homo Politicus. Kingsley Bass is my name. Very pleased to welcome you to this broadcast as we reflect again, today. Let's get talking with my guest who joins me virtually now, the Executive Director of a civil society organization, the Committee for the Protection of People's Mandate, Nelson Kujimi. He joins me again, as mentioned, virtually. Many thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Condolences to the people of Daura, Katsina State, and Nigerians in general over the loss of this icon of democracy. May Allah grant his soul al-Jannat without.
Yeah, indeed. And indeed, condolences to the families, his wife, and the children, those he left behind. Indeed, to those, the many politicians, military men, women he worked with, and indeed Nigeria, those who knew him closely, those who knew him from afar, those impacted by his policies as well. Thoughts and prayers with him. Let's get straight to the conversation, Nelson. I'd like to begin with how huge of a loss you think this is for Nigeria.
Oh, it's a loss that cannot be quantified. Not at this time in our history as a nation, when we need all hands to be on deck. Most especially people who have handled, who have been in positions of authority. We needed their wisdom, we needed their advice on how to navigate the stormy waters of governance. So the demise of former President Muhammadu Buhari is a very painful one, but we take solace in the fact that he lived a fulfilled life of selflessness. This is a man who, for a greater part of his life, served Nigeria and its maker, and we cannot run away from that. He was a former military general who enlisted in the Nigerian army, and he spent a larger part of his youthful, life serving the Nigerian people in the military. And when he became aged, he also volunteered his service to the Nigerian people in civilian, democratic dispensation. And after 3 trials, he eventually was elected by the Nigerian people in 2015 and re-elected again in 2019. And despite attempts by anti-democratic enemies to lure him to go the way of one of his predecessors in military guard, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. If you remember, when the election in 2023 was conducted and INEC was announcing the result, a former president, a former military leader, General Olusegun Obasanjo, wrote him a letter that he should abort the process. And President Muhammadu Buhari replied that under the law, he has no powers to do that, which was the same way General Chief Olusegun Obasanjo advised General Babangida in 1993 to annul the June 12 election, and he suggested an interim contraption called ING. And because Babangida never wanted to, leave office, Babangida acceded to that reasonable suggestion, and that scar still lives with us. But President Muhammadu Buhari has demonstrated the fact that despite being a military man with a military background and military mentality, that he is a Democrat par excellence. And that can be gleaned from the way he conducted himself as the president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So the loss cannot be quantified, in any form.
Indeed. Lots of Nigerians would speak of the president in diverse ways, and depending on what your focus was in those two terms, you definitely would be talking about the former president, the late former president, in different manners. But let's talk about from your standpoint, and not just personally for you now, but the big picture, which is the nation. What, in your view, was or are some of the most impactful moments of the Muhammadu Buhari administration in those two terms?
Yes, I remember vividly well. If we recollect, let's go back in it. In September 2014, under former President Goodluck Jonathan, the Minister for Finance and the Coordinating Minister for the Economy, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, announced the shock of Nigeria that the federal government was broke, that the federal government was borrowing to pay salaries. And by the time former President Muhammadu Buhari came into office, close to 25 states were in default of worker salaries, pensions, and emoluments, running into months and years. And when President Muhammadu Buhari mounted the saddle, he gave what was known as bailout funds to states to be able to meet that obligation to workers. Because President Muhammadu Buhari himself said, look, a worker deserves his wages. That any government that has employed people and is unable to pay them is a murderous government. And he did that on several occasions to ensure that the states, received, that the states were, given a lifeline to meet obligations so that families, can have food on their table, they can send their children to school, the economic activity of the country can be vibrant. I also recollect that President Muhammadu Buhari was in office when the price of crude oil per barrel dropped from what he inherited from his predecessor. When his predecessor was leaving office, the price of crude oil per barrel was about $65 to $70 per barrel. But under President Muhammadu Buhari, the price of crude oil dropped to $28 per barrel. And even with that, we had the misfortune of being sabotaged by criminals who call themselves Niger Delta Avengers or militants. And they were destroying pipelines and oil platforms, that our production quota dropped from about 2.1 million barrels per day to about 500,000 barrels per day. Even in the midst of this economic sabotage, President Muhammadu Buhari weathered the storm economically in navigating the Nigerian economy out of this economic shock, economic sabotage. And again in 2019, you recollect, the economy of the whole world closed shop
The
as
recession.
a result of COVID-19.
The famous recession.
But before then,
Okay.
Hello?
Yes. I'm with you.
Before then,
Yeah.
President Muhammadu Buhari had placed a ban on about 43 items in order to save the Nigerian economy. Because Nigerian economy under his predecessor became so bad that we were importing even toothpicks. But all this for these items and some others, President Muhammadu Buhari stopped it. President Muhammadu Buhari also closed down our borders. It was the closure of borders that ensured that we did not have food crisis when COVID-19 came. Because by then, we were no longer importing to feed our people. Rather, the production of basic foodstuffs like rice was on the increase. I can tell you that as a young man, I'm in my 50s now, when I was in my early 20s or in my teenage years, I used to hear of Abakaliki rice. But under President Muhammadu Buhari, I saw and I bought Abakaliki rice, I bought Gombe rice, I bought Nasarawa rice, I bought Kano rice, I bought Kaduna rice. So it was a situation in which it was like President Muhammadu Buhari foresaw the danger that was 19, even though.
Okay. Hopefully, we can re-establish connections with Nelson. Seem that we lost connection with you for a moment, but if you can hear me clearly, yeah, I get your point about some of those policies, and it's a fine job you've done going down history or memory lane, trying to recollect some of those achievements, during the times of former President Muhammadu Buhari, who, by the way, has been laid to rest in Daura, his hometown, his agrarian hometown. Very sad times for his family and indeed the people of Daura. But that said, Nelson, if you can hear me clearly, let's talk about the flip side. Fantastic. Okay, let's talk about the flip side to some of these policies. For example, you did mention the fact that in just a few months, the former president, his administration was already rescuing a lot of the state government in Nigeria from collapse and helping them to pay salaries. But then again, there is a talk about the 30 trillion naira ways and means, which is something that was borrowed, some form of loan obtained by his administration as well. And there's been talks about the fact that further put the economy of the country in jeopardy. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, I agree that the borrowing by the administration of President came at a divine time to rescue the Nigerian economy, and he still he brought about that policy of war against indiscipline, because Nigerians from time immemorial have exhibited indiscipline as a way of life. So he launched the war against indiscipline, and everybody was moving to line. And in 2015 also, it came at a time that his predecessor had driven the Nigerian ship aground. It was borrowing. He made if you recollect, when he first came into office, he went borrowing through the Sukuk bond. If you go on our roads, you see the Sukuk bond loan used to infrastructure loan used to finance, the roads being built across the country. And also, he introduced policies like the tax waiver, the Presidential Tax Development Fund, for companies to construct roads, and it will be the tax they are supposed to pay will be somehow calculated, and they will be they will have to pay. They will have to use that tax to develop infrastructure. So I agree with you that the borrowing by President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, caused us some problems. But you must also recognize that the government of President Muhammadu Buhari had no option than to go a borrowing because of the global economic meltdown occasioned by COVID-19. And then even as we speak, 5 years after, the world is yet to recover from the effects of COVID-19. And also, don't forget that even after the COVID-19 crisis, we also had the Russia-Ukraine war. So economically, Nigeria, just like every other part of the African continent, suffered from this needless war in the West, and it reflected on our economy, because our economy in Africa is very, very dependent on the economy of the West.
Nelson,
for example,
Nelson, I'm sorry, especially because of time, we've got to move very quickly, though this particular episode of the program is dedicated to the late former President Muhammadu Buhari, and indeed, to pay tributes to him, to some fundamental conversations we must have as well, especially those we're surfacing at this time, since he left government and governance in 2023. Between then and now, it's been relatively quiet, except for politicians visiting him at his hometown in Kaduna, and then the news of him visiting London for treatment before the sad, unfortunate news of his demise. But that said, let's talk about some fundamental matters that have resurfaced as well. One of those, especially in reviewing and reflecting on the times and life of former President Muhammadu Buhari, there's the security challenges to for the time he was president. At some point it was said, I remember, by the then information minister that the nation technically defeated Boko Haram, but there was the headers farmers clashes here and there. Some were there before he resumed. At some point, the headers attack, or some attacks were they were set to continue because he's from a particular ethnic group, and that his body language, permitted that. What do you say, about that perception? People still carry that perception, even now that it's been laid to rest. People still carry that perception. What do you say to that?
What I would say to that is that those who run with that perception have been able to hoodwink a lot of people. That perception is very, very unfair to the late president. You remember in 2015, when he came into office, Boko Haram was controlling about 23 local governments in Borno State and some other parts of the country. Under his predecessor, Boko Haram came as far as bombing the United Nations office here in Abuja. Boko Haram had infiltrated even states like Kogi. You also remember that under his administration, Boko Haram members were arrested even here in Lagos. So they were spreading their cells across the country. But under President Muhammadu Buhari, I don't know if you know, he met a demoralized military, a military that had no equipment to fight any war. And by the time he left office, I think you need to go and read the testimonial by former chief of air staff. He said President Muhammadu Buhari bought over 50 five-star jets, brand new, for the Nigerian Air Force. When President Muhammadu Buhari came into office, he met, I'm not sure of this, the aircraft that the Nigerian Air Force had was not up to 2. But by the time he was leaving office, he equipped the Nigerian military to the best of his ability within the resources available.
We remember the Dasuki probe and then the Tucano jet as well.
Yes, and if you recollect also, just a minute,
yes.
If you recollect also, under President Muhammadu Buhari, the military themselves came out and said they have never had these groups. And he was able to defeat Boko Haram. But knowing fully well that in society, challenges wear different faces. The issue of elders farmers clashes is one that became politicized to the extent that states that were supposed to embrace ranching and take the problem of farmers elder clashes to a minimal level. Because of politics, they abandoned it. And because Mr. President, as the President of Nigeria, does not have the constitutional power to impose any policy on states, he has to get a retreat, because the agriculture under our constitution is on the concurrent list, both the federal government and the state. And the only authority that has power over land in Nigeria, according to our constitution, is the state. The federal government only has powers over land in Abuja, the federal capital territory. So the blackmail, I also want to remind you that when President Muhammadu Buhari was coming in 2015, one of the blackmail that was placed on him was that he's a Muslim, is an Islamic fundamentalist, that is going to Islamize Nigeria. And for some of us, by the time he left office in 2023, the question we asked those who were still peddling that story, that false narrative, was that
oh dear, well, some technical glitch again there. Hopefully we can reconnect with him, and we'll pick things from this talks about. I recall very well. Nelson, are you there, please?
Yes.
Fantastic.
This was the president who had several damning allegations, blackmail, campaign of calumny, and mudslinging against his name and person. But at the end of the day, we all saw that this was a man who came with honest intentions, and he gave his best within his capacity, because whether we want to admit or not, the president is one man. The president is no four-man. The president is a mere mortal. The president, as a president, is a human being who has limited, capacity and capability. Is not infinite, and is not omnipresent and omniscient. If he's in Abuja, even the door next to his office, he doesn't know what's going on there. Only God knows and sees everywhere. So President Muhammadu Buhari was a leader who came, whose commitment to the unity, progress and prosperity of Nigeria was unwavering, was, incontestable. And that is why we continue to celebrate him. We continue to treasure his integrity. The war against corruption was one war he waged within the capacity of his administration. And he also recognized the government introduced, the policy of whistleblowing. Those were part of the re-engineering of the war against corruption. But like we all know, he told us that if we don't kill corruption, corruption will kill us. And that war today has not ended. We are still on it.
Yeah, just before we go, quite a controversial one, this last one. Time will permit that we mention, and of course very sensitive too. But again, it is resurfaced. First time this came around town was back in 2017, when the late former President Muhammadu Buhari was being treated in London. Well, it's resurfaced again, the talks around the Jibril of Sudan. I'm sure you still remember that very well. Well, there are talks around that again, I know you didn't work closely with late former President Muhammadu Buhari, but what do you say about this? It looks like this is not going to stop this conversation, or this, theory of a cloned, figure being placed in the presidency, as against the person that was voted in 2015. Looks like it's not going away. How is this going to be handled, and what do you have to say to Nigerians going forward?
Basi, the role of the media is to educate, inform, and entertain. There's nowhere in the world where a human being has been cloned. Go and search history. Nowhere in the world. You can clone a robot. You can clone a machine. You can clone a car, but you cannot clone a human being. And for the information of our viewers, the president of Nigeria is the president of the biggest and most populous country in Africa. It's not one cobbler, making shoes in the corner of one village, one local village. So if anybody believes or has that assumption about a degree of Sudan, good luck to him. Good luck to him. But if it's somebody whom God has created and has made a higher animal than ordinary animals, he or she will know that that story is an insult on the sensibility of anybody who even listening to it. That is just a message.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Thank you, Nelson Kujimi. Nelson Kujimi is the executive director of the Committee of People's, the executive director of a civil society organization. And I would like to thank you so much again for your time today and for being a part of the conversation. Indeed, this conversation has been one that is used to pay tribute to the late former President Muhammadu Buhari. He's been laid to rest, but yet there's still more to come. There's been the 9-man committee put together by the president to ensure that they organize a befitting funeral, state funeral for him. Well, there are talks too. There have been talks too about the necessity, Nelson, just before we go, the necessity of this state funeral. I was speaking earlier today with the former Minister of Communications, Adebayo Shitu, who mentioned the fact that the late former President Muhammadu Buhari would not have wanted, this much noise. As a matter of fact, the life he mentioned to me of an average Muslim faithful is not this. That's why they're buried immediately they die. What do you have to say about this? Is this necessary? For example, the National Assembly as well shut down for 7 days just in honor of the late former President Muhammadu Buhari. What do you say, especially to that, those who believe, well, this is not necessary. Let's pay tribute, let's do what we have to do and continue to proceed?
Well, looking at the life and times of former President Muhammadu Buhari, if he was alive and he saw this, he wouldn't have wanted it because he was a very simple, humble, and selfless human being. He was a legend among humanity. But this is the least of the honor we can give to this gift to humanity by God. And if we are doing this, we are sending